This is Heather Greene. I am a whiskey expert and author of Whiskey Distilled, a populist guide to the water of life. And as promised, I'm bringing this fabulous book to life in a series of whiskey tastings so that you can become your own whiskey expert during this downtime when we're all at home. And I don't know about you, but it is getting on my nerves, right? It's definitely getting tough. I get it. But learning how to nose and appreciate whiskey is going to enhance your everyday life. It's about knowing more about yourself, your biology, and really understanding your preferences. And this is really important to me, especially this week, because another thing that really got on my nerves is that I started seeing just so many online posts about these guys are just running out and they're so excited about, like, look at this pandemic stash I found of all these whiskeys, these rare whiskeys, somewhat rare, tougher to find now. Maybe 10 years ago they were easy, now they're like $10 more and tough to find. It's like they're hoarding it like toilet paper, sickening in there. They're not enjoying it or drinking it. It's just all about this badge of honor of finding these whiskeys. But it doesn't make any scientific sense, right? These comparisons, like this one versus this one tonight, I'm gonna like head-to-head tasting. It's all fun, actually. I guess it's fun, but it doesn't make any scientific sense. And for you, it's maybe a guide for understanding what you might like if that person has the exact same palate you do. Or if they say or follow up, drink this whiskey if you like A, B, or C, or D, then it begins to make a little bit more sense, right? And that's because of something called biological variability. This is really where we try to bring a little science and a little depth into our nosing and tasting. Biological variability, what does that mean? Well, it means that between 350 and 400 genes that we're born with to determine our ability to nose and taste, almost a third of them are going to vary amongst us. A third. That's a lot. That means that we're all going to nose and taste certain organic molecular compounds at different strengths and maybe some not at all. That's called anosmia. When you have a blind spot, it's called anosmia. And you may have seen that a lot in this week in the paper because the virus or viruses can give you a loss of smell. Some people are actually born with it. It's called anosmia. So some of us have anosmias. I might not even smell something that you smell. So this biological variability is really, really important when we nose and when we taste our whiskey. So take that with a grain of salt when you are nosing and tasting a whiskey or listening to somebody who's going on and on and on about this certain whiskey that you should taste or which one is better than the other. Biological variability isn't the only thing we need to think about. Of course not. There's something called cultural variability. When I sit at a whiskey table, I come with a whole culture behind me. How did I grow up? What did my parents think about drinking whiskey? Was it super taboo in my house? Did I have a lot of hurdles to overcome to be comfortable sitting at a bar or even going into the store and asking questions about spirit? These things aren't to be dismissed. I mean, this is a hurdle that will come between some people and their glass of whiskey or enjoyment. So there's a lot of psychological aspects that we have to come into to enjoy a whiskey depending on where we grew up or where we come from. Religion plays a factor, certainly gender plays a factor, different countries, how you grew up drinking, all of that stuff comes into how we relate to that from a cultural aspect. And then how we respond to the actual aromatic notes is also about culture. So let me just give you a concrete example of what that means. I was teaching a class and we were using whiskey with a lot of peat, and peat falls under the umbrella of phenolic compounds. So there were phenolic compounds in that whiskey. And some of those phenolic compounds that we can describe are iodine flavors, maybe medicinal, tar, earthiness, cleansers, like coal tar, actually, pine sol. And one person said, oh God, this reminds me of the hospital my mom worked in where I grew up. And another gentleman said, man, this smells clean and wonderful and fabulous, and I can't wait to dive in. So these are two completely different backgrounds that came together. We're drinking the same glass of whiskey, and we could see how the emotions and memory were coming into play on the nosing and tasting of the whiskey. And so we have to think about that when we go out and we enjoy our whiskeys, especially in a group setting, or if you're doing a Zoom tasting, or you eventually go back in, is that you have to be confident that you bring your own unique self and set of circumstances to the table. So we have to think about those things when we taste our whiskey. And the final thing, which I think we've been waiting for, because when I teach a class, we were like, are we going to actually get into nosing and tasting? Yeah, we do finally get into it. But I spend so much time on the nosing because nosing is everything. And that is the number one secret of becoming your own whiskey expert. So let's get into the actual mechanics of nosing and tasting our whiskey. You've probably been waiting for that. We're into the 4th video and we're finally getting into that because nosing is everything. And that's the big secret about becoming a whiskey expert, is understanding your nose. So I did spend a lot of time on that. And in the book, it's, 50, 60 pages worth. You can even get more in depth on it. So I want to talk a little bit about how I do that. And to do that, I want to pick a really fabulous whiskey. What shall we pick? My own whiskey, shall we? So this is an unbranded series, but I can't help it. I just released this whiskey. I'm really excited about it. So this is the Milam Green Triple Cask. There's 3 different casks that are batched together to create this whiskey. The heart of this is made right in Blanco, Texas, which is where I'm living right now, right outside of Austin, actually, downtown Austin, close to Blanco. So what we're going to do is just pour our whiskey. Don't get too crazy about it, and pour it into a glass that you really, really like. Okay, so this is really important to me. I pick glasses that I enjoy drinking out of. I don't get really geeky about it, the shape of it so much, because I think that the visual and the beauty of a glass really means part of something of the experience. And as I said, like, there's simple pleasures now, and just take them where you can get them. And having a really beautiful glass does that for me. This is from the 1960s, and my friends who own an online shop called Beekman Lane, they sell gorgeous glasses. I'm always on the hunt for something real pretty. I do tend to like a chunky rocks glass, even if it's not etched. These have to be, unfortunately, hand washed because there's gold on them, but whatever works for you is what I'm trying to say. Then I also like a wide mouth. So the reason for that is because, you remember this chemical compound? That's right, ethyl alcohol. It's pretty strong. And if you remember, our receptors are right here, and we don't want to anesthetize things. We don't freeze them and just be get that kind of that brain burn, so to speak. So we just want to nose and gently kind of get the aromatics on that. So the wide circular opening allows that to dissipate a lot easier than those little small circular opening. And so for beginners or just even people, aficionados, I think this is a great way to get at the beautiful aromatics of a whiskey. So I just start to nose, and I start to think about just the perfumes. Now remember, language, olfaction interference is going to interfere with our ability to really just enjoy it and then talk about it at the same time. So if you can, just kind of nose it and just sink into it and just enjoy the smells. It should have as many smells as your favorite perfume. So you can use even some of those notes, or your cologne or your wine that you enjoy. You can use the same vocabulary, so honey, honeysuckle, orange, and flowers and things like that. And if you remember from last video, no, these aren't infused into the whiskey, but how they get in there, we'll talk about later, and why these aromatics are there. You can go back to episode 3 and see me talk about that. So I just get these really lush, beautiful, this wonderful burst of aromatics here that just really, a good whiskey should just really invite you in and say, come on in, let's have a good time, So I taste it. And then I let it sit there for a minute, It's really silky, this one, so that's something I would put under the heading mouthfeel. Mouthfeel is viscosity. So what did it feel like in your mouth? Was it silky smooth? Was it like velvet? Was it creamy? Was it astringent? Was it drying? Did it make you pucker up? These are all mouthfeel feelings, and that's important in evaluating a whiskey. Then also, how did it finish? Did it finish really, really long? Was it something that you want to enjoy all night? Or was it a quick disappearing out the door and you're like, you know what, I don't need this to last all night. Just a quickie is fine right now. I don't want to think about it. You know what I mean, right? So I think that we think about those things. You want a long finish, you want a short, quick finish, the viscosity, the mouthfeel, all of these things come together with the inhalation and thinking about those smells. And then, of course, remember our retronasal olfaction. And when you think about it, there's so much going on in our brain and this glass of whiskey. And then we have the biological variability, the cultural variability that add into it, the different anosmias. And then we've got all the people chattering in our ears about what we should be nosing and tasting. And it actually, when you think about it, it becomes a pretty complicated process. So how to simplify that is just to remember that you have a very unique palate, a unique background that'll really influence your own enjoyment of whiskey. And with that, I just want to say have a great, healthy week. Take your first whiskey, take something out of your shelf, something that you can afford, something that you can share with somebody you live with, or even if you don't, get a nice drive-by delivery, pour some in another, deliver it to somebody else, hose it down, bring it in your house, and then share it over Zoom. You could do that. It's complicated, but why not? And just enjoy your whiskey. Have a healthy and safe week, and cheers to you all.
Yeah.